You're listening to the Study Podcast with Dr. Paul Wegner. I'm your host, Tyler Sanders. I'm here with Dr. Paul Wegner. He's going to give us the Hebrew word of the day for the book of Nahum.
Yeah, first I wanted to just point out Nahum. How many have ever even heard of this book, right? And
Yeah,
and yet it's actually pretty interesting, but hardly anybody would even know about it. So Nahum is written to the Assyrians. Do you remember we talked about Jonah? And remember who it was written to?
Who it was written to? I would assume it was written to.
Yeah.
It was written about these. I mean, the Assyrians are certainly part of that, right? Like with Nineveh.
Yeah. Okay, so Nineveh, yeah, there we go. And so that one was in like the 800s, remember, or somewhere in that date. Remember, God let him off and he didn't punish him. Now it's time for punishment. So Nahum, virtually the whole second half of the book, or whole part of the book, is about the judgment that's coming on the Ninevites.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it's about 100, maybe, probably let's say 100, maybe a little over that, but about 100 years later. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. I got some real Hebrew for you this time. Yeah. Okay. All right. The first line of verse 3 of Nahum, it actually says, the Lord is slow to anger. That word, that slow to anger is literally long of nostrils.
Mm. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And I thought, okay, that's something you'd never get if it's in English. You'd miss that totally. But any idea why it talks about long on nostrils?
I do, yeah. I taught about, I briefly mentioned this when I taught our youth group a month or two ago, the opposite side, about how anger is often described in Hebrew.
Okay.
And that it's the tip of your nose is hot, right? Yeah. It's like heat has reached the end of your nose.
Ah, there we go.
And like I'm fed up.
Okay.
So if you have a long nostril, if you have long nose, that would mean it would take longer for the heat to get there, right?
Okay. Good.
Is that right?
Yeah. That's good. So when you're long of nostrils, that actually means that it takes a long time. You're telling me it takes a long time to get there. So that means that God is very patient because it takes a long time for his nose to get red. You remember when you get mad at somebody, your face turns red and your nose turns red. Yeah. So that's the image it's saying.
Yeah.
The rest of that verse says, he says he's great in power, and the Lord will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. That one's actually a really funny thing. It means to acquit somebody. And do you remember, I think we've talked about this first, when an infinitive with the same root radicals is before it, that means it's for like emphatic. So it means this one has the infinitive first, then not, and then that word acquit. So it means he will, in my translation says, he will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. But literally it means he will certainly not ever acquit the guilty person. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting, and that gives you another little Hebrew tidbit that when the infinitive with the same root radicals is before it, it's for emphasis, and it comes before then the main verb. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just in case you already knew that, Tyler, I thought I'd give you another one. All right.
Let's hear it.
And this one is more even an English word. We hear the word, it says, verse 6, who can stand before his indignation? And I'm going, how many people actually know what indignation means? I think most people.
It's kind of an uncommon word.
Yeah, but I think most people think it means anger or wrath or something like that. And that is pretty much what it means. But it can also mean, and probably has this nuance, to have an annoyance provoked by somebody that, or something that you think is unfair. So when it says God will who can stand before his indignation means who can stand there when God is really upset about things that are so unfair.
Right.
And I thought, that actually helps us understand. So now remember, Nahum is written to the Assyrians. God used the Assyrians to punish the Israelites, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
and Habakkuk has talked about that, and all the he's talked about the Babylonians, but even before that, God was going to use the Assyrians. But the idea is, even though he's using them, he knows that they're going too far. And remember, we found that in Isaiah.
Yeah.
He punishes them because they went beyond what they were supposed to do. But
Mm-hmm.
here's God looking at the Assyrians and realizing that he's angry at them because what they're doing is so unfair and in unfair treatment. So the Israelites didn't deserve what, even though they were wicked, they didn't deserve to be wiped out. And that's what the Assyrians were trying to do to them. Okay?
Yeah.
Sorry, there you go. That one's almost more of an English one, but it helps us to understand what that Hebrew is getting at also.
Yeah, it does. Completely. I mean, it kind of flavors.
Yeah.
It makes it more specific.
Yeah. And more nuanced, I would have said, to help.
Reaction.
Good. All right. Here's our book. It's only got 3 chapters. All right. So that ought to help us get through it a little quicker anyway. I've called it Punishment for the Assyrians. Basically, most of the book is about that. Now, the first part of the book is talking about judgment on Israel, or Judah is the only one that's actually left at this time. But it basically is talking about the punishment that he's going to do on Judah. But he's using the Assyrians to do it. So the first, let's say 15 verses are basically saying that God is done punishing Judah. And then the next 2 chapters are God's going to take over and punish now Nineveh. So remember, even the last time we talked about Habakkuk, and God said he was going to bring the Babylonians on them. And Habakkuk couldn't hardly understand that, as how can you use somebody more wicked to punish us who are less wicked, remember? Well, Nahum could probably do kind of the similar thing, because God's using the Assyrians to punish them, and they're probably wondering, what are you doing, God? Well, the whole last 2 chapters are pretty much God wiping out the Assyrians and punishing them. Okay? So that's pretty much where it breaks. So 1 chapter is about Judah being punished, but now the judgment's over. The next 2 chapters are pretty much God's judgment on Nineveh, the people that have punished Israel. Okay?
Okay.
Then on the very bottom there, I've got that Nineveh is spared in Jonah, and then in Nineveh is destroyed basically in Nahum. So you can see the big difference. If you think about it, that's, it says that God was long suffering, long of anger. Yeah. In actual fact, you can see that God doesn't punish them till about 100 years later. So that's quite a bit of patience, I would say. Most of us don't have that long.
Yeah, of course, right.
Yeah, his name is a little unusual too. His name means comfort. But it's certainly not comfort for the Assyrians, right? Because I've told you they're going to be punished. So it's comfort for Israel. And I think the logic is that God is going to hold them the Assyrians responsible for the wickedness that they've done too, and so the Israelites can be comforted that they're going to get their punishment also. So I think that's where the name comes from in this book, anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Basically, the purpose is to announce judgment on Nineveh. I think the key verses are right in verses 2 and 3. It talks about God being a jealous and avenging God. Let me read it for you, because it's interesting. A jealous and avenging God is the Lord. The Lord is avenging and wrathful. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserves wrath for his enemies. Wow, when you look at that, God sounds like a mean ogre, doesn't he?
Right.
Look at the next verse, though. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power. The Lord will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. In a whirlwind and a storm is his ways, and clouds are the dust beneath his feet. So there you've got, okay, he might be avenging and wrathful and all that, but he's also a very patient God who gives time to repent and all that. And when that doesn't happen, then you feel his vindication or his indignation, like we talked about.
Right.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's probably enough on talking about the structure. We'll go into the book now. So we've already talked about the key verse now, so we've done that. The message is the Lord is going to bring judgment against the Assyrians. That's key throughout the book. The background is that the Assyrians have inflicted the Israelites for about 150 years, and they're not a kind people. Their whole goal was to scare the other nations so much that they won't rebel against Assyria. So that was their how they went about their job. And so at this point now, God's going to turn the tables on them, and they'll get theirs. It says that the author is Nahum. It says he's an Elkoshite. I assume that's a place, okay, but I'm not even sure we know where that is anymore.
Wow, interesting.
But I think the whole key is that his name is Comfort. And I think that's probably, just because his name is actually more important than anything else in the book, because we know very little about him. Okay. Another thing that's really interesting is, look at the title of this book. It says, The Oracle of Nineveh, the Book of the Vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. That's actually funny. That's not how most of the prophets' titles are. Usually it says something like an oracle of Nahum, and then might say against the Assyria, or a vision against Assyria, or something like that. So this is kind of interesting that it actually gives an oracle against Nineveh. So it's letting you know what it's about even before it talks about who's going to bring it.
Yeah, the author.
Yeah. So
very interesting.
Yeah, I looked at that. I thought, man, that's unusual. All right, so I thought that was good. All right, here's the Assyrian Empire. I wanted you to see, there's where Nineveh is, pretty much centered in the middle of their empire. All right. The date of Nineveh, the destruction of Nineveh, which occurred in 612, is talked about as a future event. So it says they're going to get their judgment, but obviously they're not there yet. It does mention the destruction of Thebes. It calls it Lo Amen, and it mentions it in 3:8. It talks about it being by the water and all that. But Esarhaddon destroyed Lo Amen, or Thebes, in 663. So that's talked about as an event that already occurred. So it has to be after 663. Okay. And then it's got to be before certainly 612. But Assyria appears to be a fairly strong power at this point. About 626, it started weakening. And by that time, you could probably not say that it was really a strong power and all that. Yeah. So my guess it's between 663 and about 626. Okay. And I got that from the events that it talks about in the book. Yeah. So
that's a pretty narrow window.
Yeah. Especially now, and remember, sometimes it gives you like the kings or something that it's the prophet prophesied during. This one doesn't give you any of that. Okay. So you have to do it based upon events it talks about in the book.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The Assyrians, they've got a long history of going against Assyria, or of Israel, I mean. So like Esarhaddon III extracted tribute from them. Adad-Nirari III also did that. So that's already in the 800s. They're starting to take tribute from them. Then Tiglath-Pileser III actually invaded the land and then asked for tribute. Sargon II invaded the northern kingdom and actually pretty much destroyed Samaria and took the people off into captivity. Esarhaddon extracted tribute and actually, Sennacherib, he actually goes and just almost destroys Jerusalem. He's pretty much destroyed most of Judah in 701, but right when he's getting ready to destroy Jerusalem, God stepped in. So he invades Judah, and they pretty much still extracted tribute from him. Esarhaddon did that, and then Ashurbanipal. So you can see the dates there, all the way from about 850 down to about probably 630. So that's a long time of Israel being under the thumb, basically, of the Assyrians.
Something like 200 years,
Yeah,
essentially.
I put in here, the Assyrians have been a constant threat from the mid 9th century to the mid 7th century. And thus the phrase, though I have inflicted you, I will inflict you no longer. That makes a lot of sense. God was the one using the Assyrians, and now he's ready to stop and punish them.
Yeah.
So that helps us.
Yeah.
The Assyrian Empire was actually really an amazing army. They basically had the first standing army, and what I mean by that, remember, initially when a person went to war, they pulled people that were like farmers or anybody that lived there, and they had to actually fight off other enemies. Well, the Assyrians were the first ones to have an army dedicated only to fighting wars. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't use others. They conscripted other people when it was time to go to war. But to have and it could be several 100,000 that they had as a standing army. If you think about it, if nobody else is doing that kind of thing, then you can see why they were a foe to be fought against, and if people were afraid of them. It makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. And they were the first ones to deport nations. So and that's the Northern Kingdom got to feel that. They were very cruel, and they did that so that they could scare people into submission, basically. They use fear to get nations to submit. Yeah, we talked about that, and then they charged high tariffs or tribute. That was pretty much so. So that means that Assyria could build their army and their capitals and all that, fortress cities and stuff like that, because they were pulling in so much money from these other countries. Yeah. So the Assyrians are going to be punished, and for good reason. He's been gracious. Remember last time God talked to the Ninevites, he let them off. Not this time.
Yeah.
So I thought that's interesting. And in chapter 1, it starts off with the judgment on Judah, okay? But it talks about God being awe-inspiring and yet just. And the only way you can be jealous and avenging and something like that kind of a God, but also a refuge and kind and stuff like that, is, I would say, is because in verse 3, and verse 3 says, he's very long suffering and he allows the sin to go on for an awful long time before he finally punishes them for it.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of interesting. That book is, I think, helpful to help us know this. Here's what it says. A jealous and avenging God is the Lord. The Lord is avenging and wrathful. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries. He reserves wrath for his enemies. But the Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and the Lord will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. Then it talks about him being in the whirlwind and stuff. Verse 6, who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the burning of his anger? His wrath is poured out like fire, and his rocks are broken up by him. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows those who take refuge in him. So that last verse also really helps us to know the only reason he's angry at people is, and especially with that, using that word indignation, is when they're unfair and he sees it as unjust, and they don't turn to God in help for him to be their stronghold.
Yeah.
So it's a really, I think, a really important theology lesson here in the book of Nahum. And it's not even, it's to the Israelites, but it's not really teaching about what God's like other than doing it out of judgment on another nation.
Yeah.
So it's,
but I do think Nahum's name is probably supposed to help us contextualize that a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Because like you said this earlier, and I was going to ask about it a little bit later, maybe. Like you kind of referred to Nahum's being, an oracle to Assyria or to the Ninevites.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting way to put that. It's certainly about them.
Yeah.
Would you say, like, when you say like it's to them, is it kind of like what Jonah was preaching in Nineveh, where he was kind of calling people to repentance? Or is this more of just like a declaration of what's coming, you think?
I think this is more of a declaration. I think the Jonah was giving them a chance to turn back to God. And it sounds like they did. I mean, God was very gracious there, even though I doubt that they turned to Yahweh only and all that, but they certainly did their best to try to appease this God that was so angry. And I think so I think what he's saying now is, you guys have gotten so deep into your sin, it's now impossible, and I'm going to have to do the punishment, which is exactly what happened to Israel, right?
Yeah. But it is interesting to contextualize that with this idea of God as comfort.
Yeah.
And that there is something. I do think there's something kind of comforting in this idea of God is going to make everything right.
Yeah.
The balance is going to be restored. Like unjust behavior is going to be countered by justice. Like there are something comforting about that. But it is, it's a very fascinating way to kind of communicate that back to Israel. Really,
Yeah. So anyway, so that's how it starts.
Yeah.
All right. Then the rest of that chapter, there's more. It talks about Yahweh's verdict for Judah is they've been punished, and now it's done. They needed the punishment. They needed to be taken into bondage, and the northern kingdom gets carried off. But now the punishment is over, and Assyria is going to get theirs. Is pretty much it. And verse 14 makes it real clear. He's going to cut them off. That's actually different than he ever says about Israel. He never says that Israel's going to be cut off. In fact, just the opposite. He's basically makes sure other nations don't cut them off. But the Assyrians, that's not true. And then verse 15 says that it sounds like peace is coming. Here, let me show you what it looks like. Okay, so verse 12 says, "Thus says the Lord, though you are at full strength, and likewise many, even so they will cut you off and pass away. I have afflicted you, I will afflict you no longer." So the Assyrians will pass away, and they're not going to be inflicted anymore. "So now I will break his yoke bar from upon you, and I will tear off your shackles. The Lord has issued a command concerning you. Your name will no longer be perpetuated." These are the Assyrians. "I will cut you off. Idol and image from the house of your gods. I will prepare your grave, for you are contemptible." God, sounds like he's really upset with Assyria, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now verse 15. "Behold, on the mountains the feet of him who brings good news, who announces peace. Celebrate your feasts, O Judah, pay your vows, for never again will the wicked one pass through you. He is cut off completely." So that's a pretty strong message of these Assyrians are going to be gone, and you're not going to have to worry about them anymore.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Let's see. The next part. He's got a few more verses that talk about the Assyrians. "The gates of the river are open, and the palace is dissolved. It is fixed. She is stripped. She is carried away. Her handmaids are mourning like the sound of doves beating on their breasts. Though Nineveh was like a pool of water throughout her days, now they are fleeting. Stop, but no one turns back." I think it's interesting. You know how water is so hard to contain?
Yeah.
It's got a picture of the Nineveh holding water, but the water is starting to leak out, and there's no way to get it back. So I thought that's an interesting way to talk about what's happening to Nineveh. Yeah. Okay. "Plunder the silver, plunder the gold. There's no limit to her treasures." Now remember, they got the wealth from all these other nations. Okay.
Yeah.
"Wealth from every kind of desirable object. She is emptied. Yes, she is desolate and waste. Hearts are melting and knees knocking." So they're afraid even. "Also, anguish is in the whole body, and all their faces have grown pale." So it not only talks about them losing all their wealth and all that, but it talks about the fear that God is bringing on them because of these nations that are coming against them.
Yeah.
And remember, it's going to be the Babylonians that actually wipe them out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. They actually thought Nineveh was a city that could not be destroyed. And they're finding out that's not quite true.
Right.
All right. Now here's the I told you about the date. Are you better than Lo Ammon? That's Thebes, which the Assyrians destroyed in 663, which was situated by the waters of the Nile, with water surrounding her, whose ramparts were the sea. So they used the water as their protection, whose wall consisted of the sea. Ethiopia was her might, and Egypt too, without limits. Put and Libim are among their helpers. Those are all areas of Lower Egypt, meaning Ethiopian in there.
Yeah.
All right. Yet she became an exile. She went into captivity. Also, her small children were dashed to pieces at the head of every street. Do you remember? That's what's said about the Babylonians doing to Israelites. Yeah. So that kind of idea of smashing the little ones against the rocks and stuff like that, that was a common practice that started all the way back with the Assyrians. Wow. Yeah. They cast lots for her honorable men, and all her great men were bound with fetters. So that means probably the other people were killed, but then their honorable men were taken into captivity because they could be useful for them.
So the idea here is like Thebes was essentially an invincible city as well.
Yeah.
But you destroyed them. Like no one thought Thebes could fall.
Yep.
But you knocked down Thebes. Like, do you also think no one can knock you down? That's kind of the idea, right?
Yep. That's exactly. It's interesting. Thebes is down the Nile a ways. Egypt had a had what are called fortress cities along her border. But once you got into the land, their cities didn't have walls and stuff like that because they thought, they thought they couldn't be conquered.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, verse 18. Your shepherds are sleeping, O king of Assyria. Your nobles are lying down. Your people are scattered in the mountains, and there's no one to regather them. So I thought that was interesting. So your leaders are virtually worthless. You guys think you're so invincible that you're not even worried about God destroying you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Verse 19, there is no relief in your breakdown. Your wound is incurable. That's actually said of Israel at one point too, that their wound is incurable, meaning they're going to get this judgment and it's coming and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All who hear about you would clap their hands over you. That's because Assyria had pretty much wiped out every nation before them. Okay.
Yeah.
For on whom has not your evil passed continually? So he's saying, you were the one that conquered all these nations. Now you're going to get yours.
Yeah.
All right. Here's Nineveh had 12 or 13 gates, each one dedicated to the gods, one of their gods. And the wall around it, I think when we talked about Jonah, it was a 3 days journey. And even if you went to each of the gates, 10 to 12 miles, you could have, because your message is real short. If you're Jonah, right? In 40 days, you're going to be destroyed and that's it. And then goes to the next gate. So I don't think that's what it's getting at. Okay. But you can actually see the various gates on Jerusalem or on Nineveh.
Yeah.
All right. All right, now remember, he's prophesying this fall. In actual fact, from the Assyrian and Babylonian records, actually, I think it's from both those. I think this one is talking about the Assyrian destroy, but the Akkad is another name for Babylon. It's an area in Babylon that are coming against them. It's basically a city. But here's what it says. The king of Akkad and Cyprus, that's the Persian, they both came together. He had hired them.
Yeah.
He has ferried across. They marched upstream the embankment of the Tigris and pitched camp against Nineveh. From the month of Sitmanu until the month of Abu, 3 battles were fought. They made a great attack against the city. The month of Abu, the day the city was seized, and great defeat. He inflicted upon them the entire population. On that day, Sinsharuk, king of Assyria, fled. Many of the prisoners of the city beyond counting. They carried him away. The city they turned into ruined hills and heaps of debris. The king and the army of Assyria escaped, however, before the king of Akkad. So this was the fall of Nineveh in 612.
Yeah.
The army of the king and his army goes to Haran, and in 609 there was a battle there, and again the Babylonians won. So they actually fled again and went to Carchemish. And 605, the Babylonians totally destroyed the Assyrians in 605. Wow. So even though the fall of Nineveh is in 612, it takes almost not quite 10 years, 8 years later before they're actually no longer a power.
Yeah.
So, but very often, or very seldom, do you have an Assyrian record that actually explains that a prophecy in the biblical text is fulfilled. Nahum's prophecy is now fulfilled, and we can see it in the records.
Yeah.
All right, are we ready for some questions?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, what do we learn about God in Nahum?
I think the first thing we should say is that he's extraordinarily patient.
Okay.
That's got to be something we hold in one hand, as we also see, the kind of righteous anger and justice, kind of vengeance side too.
Okay.
That is true. That happens, and we see it happening in history. But it's also true that God is very, very, very patient.
Yeah. So he gave them over 100 years to repent, and they don't. In fact, if anything, they get worse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And I want you to remember that long of nostrils.
Yeah.
Or length of nostrils. Yeah, that'll help.
Yeah.
So what else do we learn? So we learn that he's patient.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Well, that other side that he's going to act in justice.
Good.
And sometimes that's going to mean it's, can be kind of a violent.
Yeah.
Those can be kind of violent actions in a sense.
Okay.
But that, he's going to make things right. He's going to correct injustice.
Good.
And we've seen a lot of that from Assyria for sure.
Yeah. One thing that I didn't highlight very much, but I wished I would have now, is the idea that it says the earth is going to melt before him, and he stands upon the clouds, are like the dust of his feet. So the idea that here's this God that is so powerful that he uses creation to control. So that's another thing we learned from the book of Nahum, that this God controls all of nature and can use it almost as a battle against the Assyrians.
Yeah.
Okay. Why does God use Nahum to declare this prophecy? Why Nahum?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, it seems like we don't get a ton of information about Nahum. I mean, his name is interesting. I do think that's an important context too of seeing not the other side of God's justice, but the heart behind it, the reasoning behind it. That like this is this can be seen as a comforting thing because God is kind of restoring balance
or justice,
he's restoring justice. He's kind of making things right.
Good. That's exactly what I wanted you to say. So you did a great job. Because we know almost nothing about Nahum except that his name means comfort. So it's comforting for the Assyrians, for the Israelites, but it's not comforting for the Assyrians. But in actual fact, he talked about him being so long suffering, and they would have known that 100 years earlier this God interacted with them. I assume they would have known in their history. So, good. Okay. Why does God use wicked nations to destroy others?
Boy, that's a complicated question.
Yeah.
We do see it a lot, and we really see it. We see a couple versions of this, right? We see God using wicked nations to punish Israel and to shape them. And I would imagine there's some part of that that's kind of demonstrating God's strength and his might.
Okay, good.
So there's something there, but also he uses wicked nations to punish other wicked nations.
Yeah.
Right?
Good.
Like, it's not Israel that's going to punish Assyria.
Yeah.
Israel maybe that maybe that's not a great example, because I think they could probably be considered a wicked nation from time to time,
Yes.
in the biblical text. But discounting that, you're right, Babylon's going to come in.
Yeah.
And it's not like Babylon is some great holy nation by any means to punish and wipe out Assyria.
Yeah.
I think there's elements we see that are better for Israel under Babylonian rule. But still, I think we'd still consider that like a wicked nation coming in and doing this.
Yeah.
So why? I mean, it seems like they make good tools. What's the image in Isaiah? It's like a rod.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like this is kind of an instrument that God is going to use to punish Israel.
Yeah.
And so maybe they just make for good instruments because they have strength.
Yeah. Okay. And what other nation could God use if it's supposed to, are there any righteous nations?
Sure. Right. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
So, I mean, he's got to use what there is, right? So you can't, there's no righteous nation. So he's got to use somebody. So yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. All right. How do we make this book applicable in modern times? Now I got a hard question for you.
That is a really hard question. I mean, I think there's something to. I do think there's something in here. I mean, you mentioned this practice. Assyria is going to be punished, basically.
Okay.
For in Thebes. Right, the children were killed.
Yeah,
on the ends of every street, I think is what it said. Right.
Yeah.
And that was a practice Assyria did, and other nations did that, and that was a part of war. Today, we were very horrified by that idea. That's kind of like a modern sensibility. It just seems that's horrific. So I think there's something to seeing this idea of God's justice as a comfort, and that he's in charge of sometimes using these wicked nations to do wicked things as part of what's moving things forward. In his plan, there's some way these things come together and help us understand why all this is happening, I think, from a theological perspective. I think that's something. If you're really struggling with and this is a totally valid thing to work through, I think, how do we account for kind of violence in the Old Testament, war, and all these things that are kind of distasteful to us today as a modern reader.
Right.
This is a book that kind of helps contextualize that in some way.
Yeah. Good. This one is talking a lot more about the justice and even patience, and those. See, those are two characteristics that are pretty hard to put together. But this book actually does it pretty well, he makes it real clear. And when we know about Jonah happening earlier, where they get off, and now 100 years later, God can't overlook their sin any longer. They need to be punished. So I think that's part of it. And I think that needs to be said today. So I actually think the book of Nahum is actually crucial for us to know, look at here's a God who is very, very patient. He waited until, 100 years, and still they blatantly did not turn away from their sins. And God now has to say, it's time for my patience to run out. Yeah. And actually, I think that's important for us to know too. There is a point that God's patience runs out.
Yeah.
And I think people need to know that. And I think Nahum's a good book to teach that.
Yeah.
My guess is very few pastors will preach on the book of Nahum.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid that if we don't, we're going to miss an element of God's justice and God's patience that we could have let them know. And a lot of people are worried about this mean God in the Old Testament. Well, do they realize that this God was extremely patient and merciful?
Yeah.
And at that point even would have let them off had they changed, but they didn't.
Yeah.
So I think those are crucial things they need to know too.
Yeah, I agree. So. Yeah. It's it can be hard Yeah, we do. Even though a lot of times we say we don't, sometimes I think we buy in a little bit to this idea that there's kind of an Old Testament God and a New Testament God.
Yeah.
We do need to work as Christians to, distance ourselves from that kind of line of thinking. And we do need to see the continuity between not just the Old Testament and New Testament, but what it reveals about God consistently, across all of our texts.
Good.
There's a really good line I read in a commentary on Psalm the commentary was on like the first 50 Psalms, I think. But it was such a good line. It was the sacrifice, the sacrificial system. Sacrifice was something that came in for lapses in obedience.
Yeah.
But obedience has always been connected to sacrifice. And that's the way that was put was so helpful for me and kind of a big picture way.
Yeah.
Because that helps us see what Christ does. We see Christ in the New Testament, he does perform the sacrificial role, this kind of substitutionary role on the cross for us.
Right.
And it's a one-time fixes everything kind of deal. But part of what makes that work and makes it so powerful is that he also was completely obedient. Obedience is like too weak of a word. He and the Father share the same will, right? The Father and the Son are totally united in that. But you can kind of see that space, that there's this obedience, and now we have a very different relationship with God because of that. We have opportunity for that,
right?
And this whole kind of idea of sacrifice and obedience is recontextualized. We see it kind of working in a totally different way, but that's something we get from the beginning.
Yeah. Good.
That's Genesis.
Yeah.
So there's, and I just say that to kind of illustrate this idea that we do need to work to understand that this is one united text.
Good.
It can be complicated. There's a lot of detail in there. There's a lot of things we need to learn about it, but we should not be afraid of seeing that unity and kind of digging in and living in some of these things that seem hard, because we'll see that it connects.
Good. I think one other thing I want to say is that there are times when I hear people say, "Oh, that God, he's so loving, he won't punish anybody," right?
Sure.
This book makes that real clear that that's not true. He can't be just and still let sin off. So we got to realize that that's part of his character too. So
that's right.
So there's, I think, all kinds of reasons people need to look at Nahum and see what this book's all about.
Preach a sermon on Nahum.
Yeah, there we go. Well, that's pretty much our stuff for this week.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Wagner.
Thank you. Bye-bye.